we left off on number 22.26. We're talking about the schismatic churches, how they do not have the marks. And we're finishing up with the objections. Objection 1, there is no firmer principle of unity than Christ. I think that's where we are. But the Greco-Russian Church follows Christ as its head, therefore they have a firm principle of unity. Response, I distinguish the major. Christ is the invisible head of the church. I concede. The visible head I deny. And I distinguish the minor, the Greco-Russian Church, and asserts this gratuitously. I concede. It proves it, I deny. So to assert something gratuitously means you say it without providing reasons. Filaret, the Metropolitan of Moscow, and you can read about him, in his catechism alleges that Christ and the councils are the proof of the unity of the church. But the question here is not of an invisible head, but of a visible head, which must be admitted even by the Phocians, unless they want to take refuge in the invisibility of the Protestants. So if you are claiming a visible church, you must have a visible head. So to say that Christ is the invisible head is wonderful, but it doesn't give you a visible church. B, the question here is concerning the mark of unity by which the church of Christ is known. So it has to be something external and visible if it's a mark. Because every church could say, Christ is our head. If you asked any Protestant, they'd say, oh yes, well, Christ is the head of the church. Instance, the Greco-Russian churches have general councils which are the center of unity, therefore they have unity. Response, I distinguish the antecedent. They have imperfect general councils. I concede. Apt to preserve true unity, I deny. The truth of the response is evident from the argument 1b. The schismatics recognize only the first 7 councils, the general councils of the church, and they sometimes oppose the church of the first 7 councils to the papacy, as if there's some sort of discontinuity. From this, it is evident that such a principle of unity loses its vitality among them, and the corruption of schism erupts. See, by their deeds they deny the authority of the councils. The Quinisext Council, or the Council of Trullo, in 692, was added by them to the 6th Ecumenical Council, Constantinople III, which is added without cause to the list of ecumenical councils. They reject the 8th Council of Constantinople, obviously, because it condemned Photius, arbitrarily condemned by Photius because it condemned him. They reject the 2nd Council of Lyons, 1274, celebrated under Blessed Gregory X, and the Council of Florence, 1438 and 39, even though they were there, held under Eugene IV, in which they took part and to which they adhered, but afterwards rejected. So why were they there? And why did they take part? Why did they sign things and go through all of the motions, and apparently sincere motions at the time anyway, of reconciliation with the Roman Church? You can read about these. This is all from Wikipedia. All these Quintex, Trullo. All right. Article 3, number 23. Whether the mark of unity is found in the Roman Church, the unity of the Roman Church in the variety of its liturgical laws and disciplines. It is necessary that faith, government, and worship, those are the 3 elements of unity, be one in themselves, but the faith can be expressed and government can be exercised by diverse means. So unity doesn't require absolute uniformity. But to the extent that exterior acts by which one and the same truth is expressed are usually found to be multiple in each kind of discipline, so there is no harm done to the unity of a sacrament if in the performance of sacred functions various ceremonies be used to express and profess the one faith. So that is the burning question of the new Mass. Is that a Catholic rite? Do the various ceremonies express and profess the one faith? That's the question. Read Father Cicada's book to answer that question. But that's one of the burning questions. Is there continuity of worship? Is there unity of worship with the pre-Vatican II faith? And if there is, well then let's have the new Mass here, you know. If there isn't, then we can't live with it. It cannot be a side-by-side thing with the traditional faith and the traditional worship. It has to be expunged. There's the only two paths. So the purpose of the ceremonies of any rite, see, the rite is the words of consecration, for example, the actual, I think I told you this before, the ritus is just the essential elements of the sacrament or Mass. And then the ceremonies must express the truth, the ceremoniae, must express the truth of what's going on here, or the very nature of the Mass, the priesthood, everything else, baptism, whatever it should be. They must express the truth. Otherwise, they're non-Catholic. I mean, early Protestants retained the ritus. I mean, even today, for baptism, many of them retain a valid rite. But this is off. So the Church cannot approve of something that would corrupt the minds of the faithful, ceremonies that would teach error, any more than it could approve false catechisms. So, therefore, the varieties of the liturgies and ceremonies do not in any way hinder the unity of the Church. So the Eastern rites, for example. The Eastern rites are actually more expressive of Catholic dogma than the Roman rite is. The Eastern rites always consider the Roman rite to be stripped down and practically naked. You know, the traditional Roman rite, because they go on and on about dogmas, and that's true. You know, they are very expressive, the Eastern rites. You should see the oath that the Eastern Rite bishops have to take. I have that in my library. It makes the Roman Rite oath for consecration look like nothing. They anathematize everybody. Everybody gets named. Nestorius, this one, that one, this one. And you know, anathema, anathema, anathema. I mean, they're very dogmatic. So I mean, there's no problem in their ceremonies. So the Greeks use the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, and there's some other liturgies, you know, according to various rites. That's a whole other world. To the contrary, they suppose a single faith to be expressed and professed in the most perfect way. 2. In what pertains to ecclesiastical discipline, there is one authority and legislative power, and the principles of living correctly are one. But general principles are applied to particular cases, which are very diverse. So there's a general principle of fasting and mortification, but all Europe was dispensed of that during World War II. Perhaps even World War I don't know, but I know in World War II, I mean, food was a little scarce, you know, and for some reason Spain was dispensed of the Friday abstinence for some reason, I don't know what Spain did to get that, but maybe they're holier people. They don't need as much mortification. But there's no Friday abstinence in Spain. Isn't that true? Right? Oh, the Crusades. Oh, was it like a prize or something, or a gift? Oh, I see. That happens, you see. So, in Argentina, apparently, for some reason, South America is off the hook. And then there's the special dispensation for Austria. If you're traveling or you're eating in a restaurant in Austria, there's no Friday abstinence. So, there's the general principle of fasting, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't do penance and mortification. It just means that for some reason, those laws were relaxed in those cases. So in the early church, they did much more severe mortifications than we do now. And so for this reason, it has come into use that disciplinary laws, by their very nature, accommodated to the necessities of times. That should be are accommodated. And are diverse according to the diversity of time and place. So, for example, the American bishops made certain rules for Lent that are different from the general canon law, but those were all approved. See, it's the American custom to eat your main meal at the end of the day. Whereas in Europe, I don't know, that might be changing in Europe now, but the custom was that you have your main meal during the middle of the day, and then you eat something fairly light at night. Although I said to the French once, what's the difference between the two meals? They said, really, there's no difference between the two meals. So anyway, but that's the souper at night for the French, the supper, and then they would have a kind of a heavy soup. It's very common, especially middle, lower classes. The English eat 5 times a day. They have that tea at 4 o'clock or something, and then they eat about 7. So they eat a lot. There's some other meal they get too. Sometimes they look at too. Whereas the French are always thin. Do you notice that? Very few fat people in France. Not only non-fat, but they're thin. And yet they eat some very rich foods. I don't understand it. But so the mark of unity pertains to the Church of Rome. But certainly the United States has the monopoly on fat people. The mark of unity pertains to the Church of Rome. Argument 1, from the principle of unity. The Roman Church has an extrinsic, efficient principle of unity in faith, government, and worship. Therefore, the Roman Church is one. In faith, the efficient principle of one faith is the supreme magisterium, which is in itself one, which must be admitted by all the members of the society. So, magisterium. But such a principle is the authority of the Roman pontiff and of the ecumenical councils under that one Roman pontiff. For this authority is most apt for the purpose of settling disputes, resolving doubts, uniting the faithful, and of expelling rebels. In government, there was one head of the whole Roman Church, the Roman pontiff. This group, therefore, has a center of unity, and through the government of one, all are united into one. In worship, the efficient principle of one worship is one faith, which the worship expresses, and one government, which guards the worship. But in the Roman Church, there is one faith and one Roman pontiff, by whom the administration of the sacraments and all the rites of the liturgy are guarded. And you see the footnote. Therefore, since the faith has been destroyed by Vatican II, the destruction of the liturgy follows. All heretics go after the liturgy first. I mean, the first thing they do is alter the liturgy. Once the worship is destroyed, there follows the absence of the jurisdiction of Paul VI, since it is impossible that he who has charge of worship promulgate to the whole church a rite which defects from the faith. That's indefectibility, therefore it's impossible that he be the Roman pontiff. There is a great variety in unity which Leo XIII extolled among the Poles. In 1888, it is the most noble praise of the true Church of Christ, and one which is uniquely proper to her, to hold all peoples together in a single organization, and at the same time to cause all of them to think the same thing, and to want the same thing, even though the difference of customs and origins remains. See, so that's a beautiful thing. You come to this country, you find the same Catholic faith that is in Europe or any place else in the world. We go over to Europe or we go to Australia or any other place, and it's the same Catholic faith. You have much more in common with those people than you don't have in common. There's the commonness of faith overcomes all of the national and cultural differences. With regard to the diverse rites of the ceremonies, indeed the Apostolic See, in the manner in which it has been always been, in fact, perceived, does not only forbid, but willingly and freely concedes that each people retain and protect the legitimate customs and mores which have been handed down to them by their ancestors. There is so great a variety in unity that it is dressed like a king, conspicuous in diversity of appearance and form, by which the Immaculate Spouse of Christ is made more magnificent to behold. So it's diversity in those matters that is, it's sort of an accidental diversity. That is no diversity in faith or what those ceremonies portray, but the diversity of the various rites are actually, they enhance the church. See, it does not in any way affect the unity. The unity does not require uniformity. In other words, the Greeks do not have to take the Latin Mass. But because of the immense missionary activity of the Latin Rite, see, Europe, most of the world has the Latin Mass, including, as I said, the Russians. The Russian Catholics have the Latin Mass. They don't have the Old Slavonic Mass because the Tsar would not permit it. Japan has the Latin Mass. China has the Latin Mass. Argument 2 from Deeds. One faith is seen in the creeds, in the professions of faith, which are published by prelates in catechisms and public speeches, and in it most of all obedience is seen, by which each person is bound to subject his private opinions to the decrees of the Roman pontiffs and the canons of the holy councils. I mean, that paragraph has been trashed by the Novus Ordo. Trashed. None of that applies. B, one government, the faithful cohere with the bishops, and the bishops cohere with the Roman pontiff. All the particular churches, joined by an ordered series of obedience to one head, makes one body. That is still more or less true in the Novus Ordo. They have preserved the organizational unity. More or less true, because a lot of bishops just do what they please. I saw some bishop in Switzerland said that we should have same-sex marriages approved in the church, but give it a different name. What are you going to call it? I'll give it like sodomy. That you give it that name. Sodomitic marriage. This is the one army of Israel remaining in their tents according to their tribes. Balaam said, "How beautiful are thy tabernacles, O Jacob, and thy tents, O Israel." So one worship, the 7 sacraments are administered everywhere under a single supreme ruler through the ministers of the Roman Church. There is a single sacrifice throughout the whole world. There is no more clear monument than the expression of one worship in public practice, in the codices of masses, no matter what language they should be in all the liturgical books of the churches, whether in the East or West, finally in the custom of priests that they offer the sacrifice in any Catholic church of the whole world. Confirmation. These arguments shine as clearly as the sun in our times. The sects have the saddest face of division. The schismatics are partly divided and are partly unified only through the domination of the secular power. In the Catholic Church, the unity of religion has been illustrated with ever new splendors under the reigns of Pius IX, Leo XIII, Pius X. And nor do we marvel at the fact that the dogged adversary of the Catholic Church, namely Bismarck, don't forget he's writing this around 1900, and he's referring to the Kulturkampf, which was mostly the 1870s, and it was lifted during the early 1880s, and then it was somewhat modified, let's say. And then when Kaiser Wilhelm II got in, he canned Bismarck, and he rescinded all of the Kulturkampf restrictions. Bismarck was a anti-Catholic Prussian Freemason, very anti-Catholic. Yet he arranged that Germany be practically half Catholic through the unification of Germany. That was his doing, defeating the Austrians in 1866, and therefore making Prussia the leading country of the German Federation, or whatever you want to call it. Then it became the German Empire. Up to that time, Austria was actually everyone looked toward Austria. And then under Hitler, the Großdeutsches Reich, which is like the expanded Germany, which included Austria, was majority Catholic. So most of his subjects were Catholic. He was an avid anti-Catholic, even though he was baptized Catholic and educated Catholic. He hated the Catholic Church. Loved the modernists, though. Praised the modernists. But most of the Großdeutsches Reich was Catholic. And then what he conquered, that is France and Poland and a great deal of other Catholic areas of Europe, made the whole, that general, whatever you want to call it, the occupied lands were mostly Catholic, and he was allied to Italy, which was Catholic, and somewhat allied to Spain, which was Catholic. So, in that sense, most of his following was Catholic, or following people who were doing his will, let's say, however, willingly or reluctantly. So, anyway, that's Bismarck, who was a creep. So even he called the unity of the Roman Church great and admirable. And Kaiser Wilhelm II had a great admiration for the Catholic Church too, for its monarchism, you might say, that its monarchical authority. He was a very strong believer in monarchy, and also for its sense of authority. There's that had the Catholics had a great sense of authority. So he actually dispensed Catholic seminarians for military service. Kaiser Wilhelm. And he went down, when he had just become emperor, he went down to see Leo XIII. And Leo XIII, he had this private audience with Leo, and they were sitting at a table, and Leo was basically charming him. And Bismarck was there, because Bismarck had not been canned yet. This was right after Kaiser Wilhelm became the emperor. And so Bismarck came in and pulled him out to say, we have to go. Because he saw that things were sort of gelling with Kaiser Wilhelm and Leo XIII. So, confirmation. These arguments shine as clearly. Okay, we said that. This unity is not mechanical but living, by which the mystical body of Christ has never ceased, despite whatever causes sought to break it up, to be undivided in itself and divided from anything else. St. Thomas says that the source of this unity is the faith which professes belief in the Holy Ghost unifying the Church. Now, you have to think of this apart from the Novus Ordo, because you can't even think about this, the unity of the Church in regard to the Novus Ordo. It's just not possible. The Holy Ghost is said to vivify and unite the Church. Charity unifies the whole Church in the unity of spirit. Cajetan comments on what the sense of the angelic doctor is in this place. Anyone among the faithful considers himself to be a member of the Church, and as a member of the Church believes, hopes, administers the sacraments or receives them, teaches and learns. And because of the Church, he does these things as a part, because of the whole, to which pertains whatever is and whatever does these things according to the faith and the tradition of the Church. Beautiful. Objections. Among Catholics, for example, among Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits, and among Gallican bishops and ultramontane bishops, some very bitter controversies have been fought over matters of faith. Therefore, the Roman Church is not one. Typical. Response. I distinguish the antecedent. There have been fights about defined matters of faith. I deny. About doubtful things and matters which can be freely discussed, I subdistinguish. The Catholic people are willing to submit themselves. In the case that the Church defined, I concede, otherwise let it pass. This must be noted first, that there will be seen in the Church until the end of time both human infirmity and divine power. Both of those things will be present. The latter is a remedy for the former, which is the cause of the fights and controversies. All right, so there's all sorts of little things, big things too. I mean, the doctrine of grace is a very important aspect, and so there are theological controversies about things that are able to be discussed. And then there's personal controversies. Aquila and Venice hated each other for a while because they both wanted to have the patriarchate, and Venice ended up with the patriarchate, but that was just terrible. And other jealousies and human frailty presents itself, in the Church. It's composed of human beings, and they're not all perfect. For there were not lacking controversies even among the apostles. But through the magisterium of the Church, unity was preserved. In this way, the observance of the Legalia was settled by the Council of Jerusalem. And there were fights. St. Epiphanius and St. John Chrysostom couldn't stand each other. And there was somebody, St. Philip Neri didn't get along. He didn't get along with somebody. I forget who it was. It was either St. Ignatius or somebody in Rome, some other saint in Rome that he did not get along with. Who was it?
He had a disagreement with St. Camillus Tolibus.
Okay.
Because he thought that as a spiritual director that if he went back into the poor slums that he would fall into gambling again.
Yeah, the St. Jerome and St. Augustine had it out. St. Jerome had a bit of a nasty character to him, but they had some nasty exchanges. But it's just human stuff. Instance, the infallibility of the Roman pontiff is considered to be an absolutely firm principle of unity, but the controversy concerning pontifical infallibility was not settled until the 19th century. Therefore, the Church of Rome lacked the principle of its unity for a long time. Response, I distinguish the minor that this controversy was not settled until the 19th century, understood in the sense that this infallibility was previously held to be doubtful by the whole Church, I deny. By some members of the Church, I distinguish. While erring materially, I concede. Formally, I deny. The Church from the beginning held the Roman pontiff to be the supreme and absolutely certain teacher of the faith. This is proven elsewhere, but those who before the Vatican Council thought otherwise were not able to be Catholics unless they retained the faith which all Catholics of all times professed. Very important principle. Garrigou says it too. Namely, that the consent of the pontiff with the bishops is subject to no error. SSPX. Therefore, at no time in the Church was there an absence of the principle of unity. So he's saying that those who denied the infallibility of the Roman pontiff were not denying it with the idea that it was promulgated in such a way, his personal infallibility, see, acting alone, was promulgated in such a way that it was binding. So they were in error, they were in even in material heresy, but not formal. That's what he's saying. But that's why it was defined, because there was because of the Gallicans. They were denying that. There was never any controversy about ordinary universal magisterium. Everybody, Gallicans included, agree with that. So there was never any controversy about that. That's why there's very little definition about it. It was just so commonly accepted. There's very little definition. It needs definition now because there's been controversy about it. Objection 2. In order to preserve unity, it is necessary to have authority which expels the rebellious. But we read that Polycarp and Polycrates and the churches of Asia, although they disagreed with the rest of the regions of the world, as well as with the popes Anicetus and Victor concerning the date of Easter, nevertheless remained in the communion of the Church. Response, I distinguish the minor. This controversy was a matter of faith, I deny. You see, the Roman popes wanted to have a uniformity of the date of Easter. The East had certain customs which they retain to this day, where it's usually 1 week after the Roman Easter. But there are various ways. Sometimes Easter would occur on the very 14th of Nisan, or it would occur during the week in certain cases. There were various customs in the church regarding the date of Easter. I think you can read about it, and I think somebody wrote a big tract on it. But he was seeking uniformity on the date of Easter. One of the reasons why the Orthodox wanted it later and not attached to the 14th of Nisan, and I'll explain that in a minute, was that they did not want to be associated with the Jews who were celebrating Passover at that time. See, the 14th of Nisan is the Jews have a lunar calendar, and so their third, I think, is their third month is Nisan, and that's when the full moon occurs. That's why it's the 14th. So you can hear in the martyrology. Tomorrow is the first. That means it's a new moon. That means you can't see the moon at all. That's the first. Then in 14 days, it's the full moon. So you can tell from listening to the martyrology what the moon is going to be like that night. All right. So that is the day of Passover. All right. So in the Roman cycle, the Roman law, Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So spring equinox is more or less the 21st of March. So the earliest it could be is the 22nd of March. That's the Roman way of calculating it, which occurs more or less with, you see, sometimes the Jews are celebrating Passover in April, very different from what's going on. But so the idea was our Lord was crucified, you see, on the 14th of Nisan. So that's why the darkness was not an eclipse of the sun, because there's no eclipse of the sun in a full moon. It's only in a new moon you get an eclipse of the sun. Because the reason you have a full moon is that the sun, it's absolutely opposite the sun. Actually, it's the other way around. The moon rises here. You can see that the sun is going down just as the moon is rising on a full moon, because it's absolutely opposite. That's why it's full. So it can't possibly block the sun. But that's it's an eclipse of the sun. So that's the Orthodox or the Eastern rites at the time just wanted their own customs preserved, and the popes did not push it, and they let it go. So, as a matter of discipline, I subdistinguish the Church used its supreme authority at the time to settle the controversy. I deny. That the authority acted with clemency in order to establish peace, I concede. So sometimes it's better to let go a little bit in order to avoid a schism. That's why Blessed Innocent XI, did not publicly excommunicate Louis XIV. They were fearful of another England. And if France had gone, that would have been a terrible, terrible disaster for the Catholic Church. So he excommunicated him privately for schism. Yes?
Because of the clergy meeting, the declaration of the clergy?
The Gallican business, yeah. And then his comment, why don't you excommunicate Louis XIV? Publicly. Well, why should I do that when all the bishops are in schism too? That was his comment. So essentially he left them in material schism, you might say. In other words, he did not want to force it in such a way that they would harden themselves and go into schism like the Eastern Orthodox. And it was an act of prudence to let it pass, and it did pass. See, in the 19th century, France pretty much abandoned Gallicanism because it was no longer attached to the government. See, when the Louis XVIII came in and then Charles X, they reestablished all of that Gallican business. But then Charles X was ousted in 1830, and then this this liberal revolutionary government came in, and so there was no idea of this national church. That was gone, and so gradually, especially with Dom Guéranger and others, the Gallicanism in France was defeated. So, yeah. So, I will briefly explain the matter. There were two Pasks. The Pasch means Passover, of the crucifixion, the character of which concerned principally the death of Christ, and the Pasch of the resurrection, in which it was customary to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. See, so there was two aspects of it, you might say. The death of Christ was solemnly celebrated on the 14th of Nisan. The solemn fast was terminated, or as others think, was interrupted. 3 days later, they celebrated the feast of Easter, the Pasch of the resurrection, on whatever day of the week it fell. So you could have it on a Tuesday. The custom of the Roman pontiffs, contrary to those who observed the 14th of Nisan, was contained in this rule: let the mystery of our Lord's resurrection be celebrated on no other day than on Sunday, and let the fast be observed up to the day of Easter. Therefore, the question regarded discipline. The princes of the church were very gentle in settling the question. St. Peter and St. Paul established the Roman custom of celebrating. The custom of the Asians seems to have been permitted by St. John and St. Philip. But without any command, Pope St. Anicetus, when he saw that Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, who, don't forget, was a disciple of St. John the Apostle, was very attached to the tradition of the Asians, did not want to insist. Pope St. Soter, the successor of Anicetus, merely ordered that the faithful were obliged to follow the Roman custom if it happened that they were in Rome for the festivities. When in Rome, do as the Romans. But it was not illicit to celebrate the Pasch according to the manner of the Asians in their own churches. Pope St. Victor, however, who reigned at the end of the 2nd century, fearing lest the Asians insert into their rites the errors of the Judaizers or the Ebionites, strongly intervened in the matter. However, it is believed that there was no decree issued by that pontiff for full execution, but that he used clemency against the Asians, who were very attached to their custom. This is so either because Victor tempered the decree at the advice and requests of St. Irenaeus and other bishops, and there's evidence of that. St. Irenaeus wrote him a letter saying, pull back, essentially, and tolerated the attachment of the Asians to their rites, or because the successors of Victor thought that the matter ought not to be pressed further. But you can see that the East was always a problem child. Instance, Eusebius says, Victor tried to cut off from communion all of the churches of Asia and of the neighboring provinces as adhering to things contrary to true faith. Therefore, the faith itself came into discrepancy. So that's Eusebius. I distinguish the antecedent. In this place, the word faith is used in the broad sense I concede, in the strict sense I deny. So Eusebius it is not a matter of faith, obviously, when Easter will be celebrated. It's a matter of discipline. So to say a matter of faith on the part of Eusebius is just wrong. The custom of the Asians was able to be called contrary to faith because the heretical Judaizers were abusing the custom and the flourishing state of the faith was in danger. So that pertains to faith. St. Irenaeus, however, is recorded to have admonished in a becoming manner Pope St. Victor, lest he cut off from communion entire churches of God who were keeping to a custom which was handed down by their ancestors. All right, so Irenaeus intervenes. Objection 3, St. Cyprian, condemned by the sentence of the Roman pontiff, was nevertheless in communion with all of the bishops in the Christian world. Therefore, in the time of Cyprian, the Catholic Church had no fixed principle of truth. I distinguish the antecedent. Cyprian was condemned by a sentence which was not simpliciter definitive, I concede. Simpliciter definitive, I deny. The use of power admits of a threefold indulgence. A, for it happens that, 1, in applying the sentence, he mitigates the condemnation. See, so even a secular judge could say, you're guilty, but I suspend the sentence for some reason. 2, after having applied the sentence, he tolerates the condemned for a certain time because of the good faith of the condemned, whom he understood to have been stirred up by the heat of controversy, and because of a hope of emendation which appears to be imminent. Having said these things, we will now consider the fact. So you could make a sentence but not enforce it. In the hopes of emendation. The North Africans were noted for being hotheads. They had a tradition in the early church of being hotheads, and the Pope probably understood this and was hoping that he would cool off a little bit. Tertullian was a North African, and he was a hothead. And they got into extremist sort of things, the Donatists, and they had a tendency to extremism. It was a very, very flourishing faith in North Africa until the Muslims came. But they tended to be hotheads. And St. Cyprian was Carthage. So this is the fact. The more common and older use of the church was to not baptize again, those heretics who were returning to the church if they had been correctly baptized previously. So that's the discipline even today. But in the 3rd century, the custom was so prevalent of rebaptizing any and all converted heretics in Africa and a certain part of Asia that the years 254 to 256, in those years, a great controversy arose between Pope St. Stephen and St. Cyprian, who was supported by Firmilianus, the bishop of Caesarea in Cappadocia, that's Asia Minor, together with many other bishops of Asia and Africa. Cyprian, in the 2nd Synod of Carthage, decreed that heretics were dirtied with the stain of profane water and had to be baptized when they came to the church, which is one. All right, so you can see that, certain... Pope St. Stephen, however, did not admit the bishops sent from the 2nd Synod of Carthage. Some say the 3rd, where the decree of the 2nd was confirmed, for even a common conversation. And ordered that the universal brotherhood, meaning the church, that's one of the terms, should not permit them into its house. The same Roman pontiff promulgated this decree: if therefore anyone from any heresy should come to you, let nothing be done again except that which was relinquished, in order that the hand be imposed for penance. So that's the famous Nicul Innovator Nisi, I forget how it goes now. In other words, that the idea was that baptism should not be redone unless it was somehow absent for one reason or another.